It is always such a pleasure. On account of, I adopted Gary how many years ago when he first came here, 10, I guess, and have never given him up and never plan to. It's simply, well, it takes one to know one. He's the best teacher I know.
How modest.
I hope you heard him on October 9th when he reviewed Antonio Fraser's The Weaker Vessel here. He's also reviewed biographies of E.B. White and Winston Churchill. He's taught sections for classic lit since it became classic lit. I believe he was teaching here when it was classical literature, and none of us knew well enough to know that that was not the proper title for this course, on account of we teach classic literature, and classical means Greece only. He has 2 children, John. I don't know who John was named for it, but Emily was named for Emily Dickinson, the love of Gary's life. And she's 9 years old now, and we don't know if she's going to be a poet, but I think she has to be. And John is 13, his lovely wife Sandy, and if you ever need to know how a French phrase is pronounced, call Sandy. She's of inestimable value in that sort of thing. Everybody got a BA, but he got his MA from the University of Chicago and his PhD from the University of Wisconsin. He did his dissertation on American writer Hamlin Garland, who is a minor writer but well worth your reading. He taught 9 years at the University of Washington, and Eastside Catholic is lucky enough to have him now. And he's going to introduce us to Alfred, Lord Tennyson, in memoriam, and you are in for a treat. Thank you. Gary?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Virginia. I hear that praise a couple times a year. It's always good for my soul. She asked me at lunch, why did I decide I would like to do Tennyson? And that's a hard question, because every spring, and when we look to the future, I get essentially a sort of a free choice. And usually when I try to think of who I would like to talk with you about, I choose somebody who has dramatic possibilities, because I'm a dramatic teacher, and I tend to enjoy most teaching materials that can appeal to my histrionical skills. I haven't done Tennyson for a long time, and I never chose him for you because it seems to me if you don't do In Memoriam or encounter that poem, you don't do Tennyson. And Tennyson has been was out of favor for maybe 35 years. He wasn't taught in college either. And I think anybody who knows college students today know how difficult it is to get a class of students who will take Victorian literature of any type. The students just aren't interested in the 19th century, much to their great loss, in my opinion. I finally bit the bullet this spring and said I would like to try Tennyson with you, maybe because I felt that you were so used to me that you'd sit here for 3 sessions even though you didn't like what you were experiencing, because you were so used to sitting in front of me. But partly because I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I suggested we do Emerson essays, and I thought you would hate them because of the difficulty and the tedium of the prose, but what was for me highly exciting intellectual experience. And just the opposite was the case. We weren't finished after 3 lectures, and we picked up in the spring and continued on with more Emerson. So you sort of convinced me that you might be willing to take something that would not be the usual exciting material. It's really quite easy to teach people like Faulkner. And Faulkner is an exciting writer. He's both in the writing and the reading and the thinking. The difficulty with Tennyson is fairly simple, I think. Tennyson is the voice of the 19th century. The 19th century in England produced a large number of wonderful writers. I think the highest century of high quality writing English literature has produced across the board, a large number. He is also the man who came to symbolize the 19th century. And when you hear the word Victorian and all its negative context, people think of Alfred, Lord Tennyson, and they turn up their nose. And it's compounded by what I think is the most difficult feature for a teacher of poetry. Tennyson's great work is the work I would like to introduce you to this week, next week, and the week after. And it is a long and very sad poem about the death of a best friend. In Memoriam, his friend Arthur Henry Hallam died of apoplexy on a trip Uh, Tennyson expected to be a relative of this man eventually, and that they would have a long life of friendship. And fate reached out and snatched this man from Tennyson, and from Tennyson's sister and his family, and he had to face the most difficult of all experiences, which is how do I incorporate into my life the loss of someone I love in a way which doesn't find itself explainable by any traditional perception of the relationship between death and life. We can easily come to terms with the death of a grandmother. Grandmothers are supposed to die, and then mothers and fathers die, and then when I am old and gray, I die. And that's the function of things. Nature was created that way, and it's the universe God wants us to live in. Well, the death of a young man, sudden death of a young man, is hard. And the reason in memoriam is so important, I think, to us, is that the 19th century is the 20th century. All of our difficulties, all of the experiences that make our living in the post-World War II era difficult were being born in Tennyson's day. In particular, what In Memoriam gave him a chance to do was to ask the most basic questions. The Romantic period is a time when cultural universality of belief was gone. Milton knew he could speak for the Renaissance. Shakespeare could speak for his time. The 18th century, why was old Johnson so damn supercilious and confident? Because he knew that when he spoke, he represented his time. And the point about the Romantic period is that we lose our faith that we can speak for anything really broader than ourselves. And when we lose that, we lose essentially the common faith or religious belief of the community. In the Romantic period, which is for us really any time from 1800 on, we have to come to terms with God and with death and with faith and with faithlessness all by ourselves. And you and I know that in the middle of the 19th century, science is rearing its ugly head, and Darwin is in the air. And the issue is very important for any person who thinks. And it doesn't come any harder than in the shape of the death of someone you love. And within the last month, I have gone to 2 funerals of 18-year-old boys and looked in their coffins and seen these bodies. Last week, a boy who is my first high school student to die was killed in a motorcycle accident. A boy who was endlessly energetic. I told Mark Rogers to shut up and sit down and listen more times than I've ever told anybody. And then last Monday, I saw him lying in perfect stillness in his coffin. It wasn't Mark at all. Any of you who are teachers know that if you teach long enough, you face this phenomenon. It's not easy. And I think the reason I wanted to talk about In Memoriam with you is I thought you would first be likely to have maybe some positive memories of Ulysses and Tithonus and Idols of the King. And moreover, I thought you might be willing, because you're used to me, to sit and join me in a rather quiet and meditative exploration of this variety of themes, all of which focus on the condition of man in the 19th and 20th century. What is faith today? No, what is God today? How do we maintain a kind of Christian, Judeo-Christian belief in an age of science, when the old easy beliefs are gone? And for many of us, perhaps are totally gone, and yet we still have to survive. So I said, well, I'll give it a chance. We'll try In Memoriam if you are interested in doing it. But it'll be a much less dramatic experience, I think, than you're used to from me, because I think drama is inappropriate with this poem. It's a poem of thought. In Memoriam is a long piece of lyric poetry. In fact, it is a large number, over 100 poems, all of which explore the shifting emotional state of Tennyson over a span of about 3 years after the death of his friend. The shock, the grief, the coming to terms with death, asking questions about personal immortality, the relationship between God, if there is a God, and me, what I have determined to believe. I think, for me, one of the keys to the 19th century is that, for the first time, we as individuals must choose to believe or not to believe. Does that make sense? You are raised now not just to be a believer, born in a church and baptized and taken by your parents to church, and you become a member, and you get married, and you die in the church. I'm trying to explain this to my students right now when we're doing Chaucer, and I want them to see that you're a Catholic, right? In 1400, you're Catholic. You're nothing else. If you think of something else, they'll cut your head off. So the issue of being a Christian is being a Catholic Christian and the best one you can be. And the issue of not choosing to believe in God is simply inconceivable. It's not there. But in Tennyson's day, in 1855, the choice not to believe, the choice to move into the modern world is very much a viable option to any person. And so you must not only choose to believe, but then you at the same time have to decide in your own mind what it is you are choosing to believe. What does God mean? And God starts to evanesce, doesn't he? The old God up there with Christ on his right hand, watching over us in comfort and ease, isn't there anymore. And he's not there for many of us either. So we need to redefine the meaning of God. And that, I think, is essentially what In Memoriam does through the grief process. The positive feature of In Memoriam is that it has some of the most beautiful lyric poetry in it in the 19th century. And it includes a large number of lines that you have heard of, including, "It is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." You can't go through life without encountering that. Even my kids at East Side know that line. So what I did, I can't expect in the least to make my way through this poem with you, but I made up 40 copies on the Xerox machine at East Side, and I'll hand out to each of you a copy of In Memoriam. I also brought along a couple of individual poems that we can use to get away from it for a little bit if we want. So what I'll do first is hand out to you each a copy of this, and you may take these with you if you bring them back, so we can continue, and then you may, at your leisure, read what appeals to you between now and next week. So I'll begin by handing out In Memoriam to you. They were sitting on the table, and there some of you might have picked up copies of the extra ones that I have. How many of you have copies of Ulysses? Okay, just hang on to those, and we'll see if we need them. I made 20 copies of these, so if we get to those today, we'll have to look on. But 40 is about as many as we need. Okay, everybody has one who needs one? Anybody missing one? No, of In Memoriam. Everyone has an In Memoriam? Okay. Do we need any more copies made? Okay. Okay. If you don't need, does anybody think I should make some more for next week? Or are these people joining us? Do you know? Okay. Maybe one of you could give me one copy of In Memoriam at the end of today, and I'll make up some more from that copy back at each side. I'd be glad to. Okay, take a look at the poem. Let's kind of set the scene. Arthur Henry Hallam was a friend and schoolmate of Tennyson. He died young. He was going to be engaged to Tennyson's sister. He died suddenly on a trip that Tennyson was expecting to take himself. He did not take it. Tennyson was at this time not thoroughly a happy man. His most recent book was not well received by the critics. He was already mildly depressed when the news came that his friend Arthur Hallam had dropped dead of a stroke, an apoplectic fit. It put him into a position where he found himself with, I think, the life experience that makes art great. What he did was, over a long span of time, write a series of poems, publishing them in pieces over the period of time, exploring the emotional state of the encounter with grief and how one comes to terms with it and grows out of it. He made the point clear, and it's a point that we should make before we look at the first poem, that as the poem evolved, it became a piece of art more than a personal statement. You do not have to find a direct one-on-one relationship between Tennyson himself and Hallam himself in this poem, because the poem itself is a creation through a fictional character called I, or me, the one who's thinking. And as he moved into the poem, he moved somewhat farther away from his own experience. So it became an intellectual phenomenon as well as an emotional phenomenon. It at no point is a poem of uncontrollable grief. It is art. And my point right now with my students is that we can find pleasure in grief and negative emotions when they are transformed into art. And I want to make that point before. I think if we forget that, we might find this poem very difficult to read, because parts of it are very sad. At all times, our pleasure in reading it should be greater than the pain we might feel with the emotions that a poem like this brings to the fore. Students in high school don't understand that. We were doing Western Wind about 2 weeks ago. You know the poem, the little four-line poem from Anglo-Saxon poetry, Western Wind. When wilt thou blow the small rain down and rain? Christ somebody who clearly is west of where he wants to be and on the ocean and needs to be blown home. And he's lonely and it's raining and the wind is letting the rain just drop gently down when he wants the wind to blow him back to his love and to his bed where he's warm and dry. And the students read this and I ask them, do you like this? And they love it. And then I say, do you want to be in this man's position? In a cold, wet place, far from the one you love and your warm bed? And they say, no. Well, why do you like it? Well, because poetry transforms an emotional position that you would like to be in into a poem you want to read and reread and memorize. Because the pleasure of the poem is greater than the pain that you encounter in the poem. And I think we need to kind of keep that in mind when we read something like this. I saw a hand. Okay, I'm going to take off my jacket now to get to work. Let's start by reading, and I know that today will be, and next week will be very largely a reading experience since the poem is not visible to you. You haven't been reading it yourself. And that's okay with me because I like reading Tennyson aloud. You will find a few things true of Tennyson. He uses a very plain and simple language. He uses planned rhyme schemes. He uses quatrains. He writes in a traditional format to take you back to your childhood. He does not try to confuse you with difficult words. He speaks simply and achieves greatness, I think, through the beauty of his sound and the carefulness of his line. So you don't find a man who speaks in highfalutin terms, doesn't try to keep you away with language. And that is something that has been held against him in the modern age, when, as you know, in modern poetry, if somebody can understand you, there's something wrong with your poem. But he begins with an invocation, which is traditional for anything great, and this is an elegy, as you know, to God as we would traditionally see him. It's a plea for support and faith. Since this is written in the Christian era, he's not going to appeal to who? The muses, right. So Milton and those who are working in a more classic mode would appeal to the muse, but he pleads right to God himself. Strong Son of God, immortal love, whom we that have not seen thy face, by faith and faith alone embrace, believing where we cannot prove. Thine are these orbs of light and shade. Thou madest life in man and brute. Thou madest death. And lo, thy foot is on the skull which thou hast made. Thou wilt not leave us in the dust. Thou madest man. He knows not why. He thinks he was not made to die. And thou hast made him. Thou art just. Thou seemest human and divine. The highest, holiest manhood thou. Our wills are ours. We know not how. Our wills are ours, to make them thine. Our little systems have their day. They have their day and cease to be. They are but broken lights of thee. And thou, O Lord, art more than they. We have but faith. We cannot know, for knowledge is of things we see. And yet we trust it comes from thee, a beam in darkness. Let it grow. Let knowledge grow from more to more, but more of reverence in us dwell, that mind and soul, according well, may make one music as before, but faster. We are fools and slight. We mock thee when we do not fear, but help thy foolish ones to bear, help thy vain worlds to bear thy light. Forgive what seemed my sin in me, what seemed my word since I began. For merit lives from man to man, and not from man, O Lord, to thee. Forgive my grief for one removed, thy creature, whom I found so fair. I trust he lives in thee, and there I find him worthier to be loved. Forgive these wild and wandering cries, confusions of a wasted youth. Forgive them where they fail in truth, and in thy wisdom make me wise. You'll see that it's a preface or a prologue, and in this little lyric are a lot of the themes that Tennyson wants us to pursue. And indeed, there are in this lyric a lot of the concepts that I think motivate Victorian poetry from most of the poets of this time. The first theme we catch, and it's something I think that most of us notice right away, is down in the bottom of the left-hand column. What we want and what we desire is certainty, don't we? And it's easy for Martin Luther in his day to stand up and say, right, this is what I must do. I can do nothing else. Here I stand on faith. That's the beginning of the Reformation. He's speaking in the Renaissance. It's a lot harder in the 19th century when it's not, I have faith, but, as you can see, we have but faith. Right? We cannot know, for knowledge is of things we see. That is, I have nothing more than faith. And if I can't choose to believe, if I can't make a willful choice to believe, what's my situation as a human being and as an adult? It's a very interesting paradox. Because now in the 19th century, faith alone is not a rock. It's not a mighty fortress. It's very fragile. And he makes a couple of interesting points in this poem about God. When you read the 19th century, you feel a little bit like you're looking at somebody who's a child lying in bed saying, I know there are no goblins out there. I really believe it. There's nothing outside that I'm afraid of. And while that child is doing that, the blankets are up over the head. And what he's doing is convincing himself of something that he's really not thoroughly convinced of. Faith isn't easy. So something like, thou wilt not leave us in the dust. Thou madest man. He knows not why. He thinks he was not made to die. And thou hast made him. Thou art just. You feel uncertainty in the stanza? Okay. They haven't reached the point where they can say comfortably, there isn't any God. We're simply a product of evolution. Something has to create us, and it has to be God. We think we are not made to be dust. We think we're made in God's image, and therefore with an end. But in the 19th century, and this is shocking material, by the way, the 19th century had not by any means made its way to Tennyson's belief as a culture yet. We have to do it as a will, don't we? We have to make that choice. We are fools, he says, on the right-hand side, second stanza. We mock thee when we do not fear, but help thy foolish ones to bear. You hear the language there? What are we as human beings? Essentially, in comparison to God, we're foolish. And if we're not making fun of God, we're insulting him practically, aren't we? By the weakness of our faith. And so Tennyson sets up the mode for the whole poem in here. It's a plea for God to give him greater strength than he feels he has. He's incapable of encountering this. And I don't know myself how we survive the kind of dilemma that he's in. Because I go back to school after going to the funeral of someone like Mark last week, and the kids want to know why. Boy at Blanchette committed suicide last week. Why? Why? Right? What happens to these people that they die, and how do we bring to high school students who've endured trauma and understanding that part of the way of the world is such things, and all you can do is feel feeble and weak unless you can bring yourself to some kind of firm intellectual footing as well as an emotional one. Okay, let's take a break from that, and now we begin. And the opening of the poem is going to be an expression of the experience of loss and the descent into the emotion, the sadness that Tennyson is talking about. I hold the truth with him who sings to one clear harp in diverse tones, that men may rise on stepping stones of their dead selves to higher things. Is that a truth? Right? Do you believe in progress? That when your old self dies, you can improve yourself and go up. This is written in the mid-19th century. The industrial age is already on the way. And Tennyson begins with a sort of statement of faith. I believe that we can grow and change from ourselves. But who shall so forecast the years and find in loss a gain to match, or reach a hand through time to catch the far-off interest of tears? Let love clasp grief, lest both be drowned. Let darkness keep her raven gloss. Ah, sweeter to be drunk with loss, to dance with death, to beat the ground, than with the victor hours, than that the victor hours should scorn the long result of love and boast. Behold the man that loved and lost, but all he was is overthrown. Now later on he's going to make a claim, you see, that it's better to have loved and lost. touches his finger on so many modern concepts, and I think this is a really interesting one. Everybody says, I believe I will arise from where I am, but it's a hell of a lot harder when you experience the grief to look into the future and say, I see how this is going to come out, and it's going to come out all right. That emotionally, one of the most frustrating of all experiences, I think you'll agree, is when you are feeling grief or loss, to have some idiot come up and say, it's not so bad, right? It'll all work out all right. Have faith. But when your best friend has died, right? How do you respond to that? That is, the future is so much less definite than the past. And I can look at my weaknesses or my failures. I can look at how I felt 5 years ago and say, what a waste of energy. If I could know how I would feel now, I wouldn't have felt that way. But in the immediate process of grief or loss or anger, there's nothing worse than a Pollyanna. I can't stand it when my wife says, smile, you know. I don't feel like smiling today. I've smiled all day long and now I want to be a grouch. And Tennyson is really pushing that hard. Who shall forecast the years and find in loss a gain to match? And you can translate this outside of grief. You lose a job, you think you die, right? There was a time when I thought I was teaching my last class. I thought that was it. I'll never have another job. And I didn't want to do anything else. And the only thing that I imagined in my future would allow me to be a teacher was coming here and talking to you. And a week from that day, I was teaching in high school. You know, four classes a day. I didn't even get a break. Or I didn't need, Lord, I didn't want a vacation, you know. I could take a day off now and then. But I couldn't see it, you know. I spent a year and a half wondering what I would do if I wasn't a teacher. And I wasted a lot of energy, a lot of pain. But I couldn't forecast the future. And Tennyson hits that bell right on the head, doesn't he? How can you reach a hand through time to catch the far-off interest of tears? When you read with your eyes open and you see these words, and you read them 3 or 4 times and you don't catch it until you realize he's using a money image, right? You put tears in the bank, and later on, there is some interest. I mean, some profit will come from it. But how do you do it? How do you reach out in the future and say, I have learned or gained or acquired from this? Very difficult. I can teach an hour on every poem. I better not do that. We'll be here for a long time. He picks up in this poem a series of places and experiences and repeats them in motifs as his emotions change. For example, he takes you through, I think, 3 Christmases, addressing the issue of how I feel this Christmas as opposed to last Christmas. The first one without the one you love, and then the next one, and then the next one. The house where Hannah lived. And one of the repeated images that shifts in his feeling is the yew tree. And you know that I know that the yew tree is a symbol of sadness and grief and loss. And so, poem 2, we're going to read the first few poems straight through, and then we'll skip over a few. But poem 2, about the yew. Old yew that graspest at the stones that name the underlying dead. Where is the yew tree? In the cemetery. Thy fibers net the dreamless head. Thy roots are wrapped about the bones. I took Tennyson first in college. I had a course in Victoria Lit from a man named Halder Holt from the University of Chicago on a PhD, who was a Chicago man and believed in getting right into the text. Spent half an hour trying to figure out the one word that summarized Tennyson's Mariana. But what he did was get me to look closely at a poet who I think I would have passed over. Look at individual words. The Chicago technique worked, and it created a great affection for me in people like Tennyson. Take a word like fibers. Tennyson picked words so carefully. The image of the tree sending its root down, and at the very end, the roots become fibrous, don't they? And the idea of the body in the grave being almost gently covered by the fibers of the root. It's not like Bryant's, the root shall pierce thy mold. Remember? In Thanatopsis, where the image of the tree's root is coming down, and he wants to frighten you with an image of death by saying that root is going right down, and it's going to go right through you, as though you could die twice, which of course you can't do. Tennyson's image is so much gentler, almost as though you're the modern word, interfacing with nature. Thy fibers net the dreamless head. thy roots are wrapped about the bones. The seasons bring the flower again, and bring the firstling to the flock. And in the dusk of thee, the clock beats out the little lives of men. Oh, not for thee the glow, the bloom, who changest not in any gale, nor branding summer suns avail to touch thy 1,000 years of gloom. And gazing on thee, sullen tree, sick for thy stubborn hardihood, I seem to fail from out my blood and grow incorporate with thee. What does he feel is appealing in the yew tree? And what does he so almost wish he had, or feel himself happening to himself as he looks at it? There's such an interesting word or phrase here about it. What does he call it? Anybody catch the phrase? Sullen what? Hardihood. Yeah, the tree is, a yew tree is apparently a very depressing tree. I don't know that anyone's ever pointed one out to me, but they always hang around in places like cemeteries. The point about the yew tree is I feel your resistance, right? Your emotional resistance, your involvement and commitment, and I feel myself becoming affected by the yew tree. You don't change. When spring comes, you don't get happy, but I am a victim of changing emotions, and there are times when one would almost wish one could become permanently engraved in a certain emotion, even a negative one. Emerson's great cry, if you recall from a few years ago, was that he couldn't retain his connection with grief, that even grief became thin after a year or so, after his son died. Remember that passage? Because at least that was true. And Tennyson and Emerson are the same world, and you can feel the connection in thought as they push that through. O sorrow, cruel fellowship, O priestess in the vaults of death, O sweet and bitter in a breath, what whispers from thy lying lip? The stars, she whispers, blindly run. A web is woven across the sky. From out waste places comes a cry, and murmurs from the dying sun. And all the phantom nature stands, with all the music in her tone, a hollow echo of my own, a hollow form, with empty hands. And shall I take a thing so blind, embrace her as my natural good, or crush her like a vice of blood upon the threshold of the mind? Now that little lyric is interesting. It's ambiguous, isn't it? He asks, sorrow, what do you say? What does your lying lips say? And what does sorrow say when you are feeling sorrowful? Or when you feel grief and loss? What is the message that you feel in everything you hear? Anybody catch the message? The stars blindly run. Right. Waste places, a dying sun. What do you feel in grief? Everything, right? It's all a waste, isn't it? That is, from the depths of grief, nothing feels like it has meaning or structure or form or shape. Does that make sense? I think he's feeling, then the poem says, well, in an ambiguity that's sort of similar to what Carlyle would think about. Do I grab that? Do I take this as a code to myself? Something that is chosen to be blind? No, I won't do that. Poem number 4. To sleep I give my powers away. My will is bondsman to the dark. I sit within a helmless bark, and with my heart I muse and say, O heart, how fares it with me now, that thou shouldst fail from thy desire, who scarcely darest to inquire, what is it makes me beat so low? Something it is which thou hast lost, some pleasure from thine early years. Break, thou deep vase of chilling tears that grief hath shaken into frost. Such clouds of nameless trouble cross all night below the darkened eyes. With morning wakes the will and cries, thou shalt not be the fool of loss. Each one of these little poems, it gives you a moment in the feeling of loss that one has. You go to sleep, don't you? He says, my will is bondsman to the dark. I sit within a helmless bark. What is a helmless bark? A rudderless ship, right. Okay, so he's going to give us the news, the loss of Hallam, but right now he's sort of letting himself go, and he asks himself, his heart, How are you now, as he lies there at night apparently, that you should fail from thy desire? You don't even dare to ask the question, why do you feel so depressed? That's what he says to his heart, doesn't he? You don't have the courage to ask that. He says, I know why. Because you had lost something. Some pleasure of thine early years. Grief hath shaken into frost. So he's sort of focusing on the emotion. Number 5. I sometimes hold it half a sin to put in words the grief I feel. For words like nature half reveal and half conceal the soul within. But for the unquiet heart and brain, I use in measured language lies, the sad mechanic exercise, like dull narcotics, numbing pain. In words like weeds I'll wrap me o'er, like coarsest clothes against the cold. But that large grief which these enfold is given an outline, and no more. This is an interesting poem because it addresses the whole issue of the art of poetry, doesn't it? Why write poems about this? That is, what's the purpose of it? He says it's half a sin to do this. Why would he call it that? Half a sin. Almost, and making it public too, since art has a public end. He says words themselves cause a problem. And what would that be? What would the problem that words cause when you try to put grief into words? Well, you have to pull yourself away from it and focus on it, don't you? He says words half conceal and half reveal. That words can't, in other words, create the actual feeling, can they? All they can do is give a form, an outline, a shape. This is an issue right now for me as a teacher, because last Friday I took in 100 and some sonnets. I had my students write, I'm teaching them a sonnet unit. And some of them are just wonderful. And we're addressing the issue, how do you create something real in a rigid form where you're more concerned about getting iambic pentameter and ABBA, than you are about anything else. It's a technical exercise. So the whole issue of what words do to create, and then the students discover that the more careful they are, the better the sonnet is, and the more powerful the words are. You see? So they're starting to come to terms with form. I think Tennyson is playing around with this. You will not create the actual grief with poetry, will you? But what you will do is make communicable the shape of it. And it acts also as an emotional balm, to put it in words. It feels better. So it's an easing of pain to put the grief in words. I'll wrap me o'er in words, is what he says, which is a great image. He says, like weeds. You know what he means by weeds here? Widow's weeds, sure. Mourning clothes. And so you put on mourning clothes, I think, traditionally, to symbolize your interior emotion, don't you? Which is black grief. And to tell the world that you're feeling bad. He says, I'm a poet. I will wrap myself in words. To make that movement out of the interior that makes the healing of grief possible. If you don't grieve, you can't be healed from grief. It's like the lancing of a boil, isn't it? It just stays there until it comes out. He says, like coarsest clothes against the cold, but that large grief which these unfold is given in outline and no more. Now we move into some very interesting stanzas as we move on to the next few poems in the piece. People do what they can, don't they, to make you feel better. This is a curious comparison. We're doing the Franklin's Tale this morning. And in the Franklin's Tale, a woman has lost her husband who's gone to England to fight. This is in Chaucer. And they're newlyweds. She misses him and wants him to come back. And she mopes and groans, and her friends say, why are you tell us night and day. Apparently she calls on the phone all night long to tell how much she misses her husband. So they go out and they try to entertain her so she doesn't feel so bad. They take her dancing and they go to the shore. None of it does any good. And the same phenomenon is mentioned here. Friends will do their best and never approach the reality of your loss because they're not coming at it from the right angle. So here's what people say, don't they? In poem number 6. One writes that other friends remain, that loss is common to the race, and common is the commonplace, and vacant chaff well meant for grain. that loss is common would not make my own less bitter, rather more. Too common, never morning wore to evening, but some heart did break. O Father, wheresoe'er thou be, who pledgest now thy gallant son, a shot ere half thy draught be done, hath stilled the life that beat from thee. O Mother, pray, God will save thy sailor, while thy head is bowed, his heavy-shotted hammock shroud drops in his vast and wandering grave. He know no more than I, who wrought at that last hour to please him well, who mused on all I had to tell, and something written, something thought, expecting still his advent home, and ever met him on his way with wishes, thinking, here today, or here tomorrow will he come. Oh, somewhere, meek, unconscious dove, that sittest ranging golden hair, and glad to find thyself so fair. Poor child, that waitest for thy love. For now her father's chimney glows in expectation of a guest, and thinking, this will please him best, she takes a ribbon or a rose, for he will see them on tonight. And with the thought her color burns, and having left the glass, she turns once more to set a ringlet right. And even when she turned, the curse had fallen, and her future lord was drowned in passing through the ford, or killed in falling from his horse. Oh, what to her shall be the end, and what to me remains of good, and to her perpetual maidenhood, and not to me, no second friend. I think when you read a lyric like this, you catch how wonderfully oral Tennyson is, and how he reads so clearly, and the words are so simple, and yet his ability to make the emotional power come through strongly is superb. People don't read Tennyson anymore, and yet that's a glorious lyric, isn't it? The point, people come to you with these consolations, don't they? It happens to everybody, right? Take heart. And his point is, yes, and that makes it so much worse right now everywhere. Mothers and fathers are saying goodbye to children. Lovers are waiting for the one they love, and they're dropping dead right now. This is consolation? I mean, give me a break. And yet we don't think we're doing harm when we say that. In fact, it's a truism which makes it possible ultimately to endure grief, doesn't it?
Would that refer to his sister there too?
Could easily. He doesn't make a specific statement that it does, but of course it certainly rings a bell, doesn't it? Yeah. He says, never morning wore to evening, but some heart did break. Of course, when you read this, it makes me so sad sometimes that I can hardly, I'd like to make reading literature fun, and I am having a good time, but I'm feeling sad, and that's what I was worrying about teaching this to you. I'd be sadder than I was having a good time, but I'm not. I'm having a good time. Lyric number 7 is a poem which T.S. Eliot said was one of the best poems written in the 19th century. In fact, T.S. Eliot said this little lyric was one of the top 3 poems written in the 19th century. It fits Eliot's image of what a modern lyric should be. It is very sad. How do you react emotionally to the loss of someone you love? Dark house, by which once more I stand, here in a long and lovely street. Doors where my heart was used to beat so quickly, waiting for a friend, waiting for a hand that can be clasped no more. Behold me, for I cannot sleep, and like a guilty thing I creep that earliest morning to the door. He is not here, but far away the noise of life begins, and ghastly through the drizzling rain on the bold street breaks the blank day. It is a wonderful little lyric, I think you can see. It touches upon a couple of emotions that I think most of us have had. What's he doing as the poem begins? He's going to Helen's house, isn't he? The house is dark. Why is it dark?
Nobody there.
There's nobody there, but also he's going at the time of day when he thinks he'll be unseen, won't he? He cannot stay away. This is, for me, a good example of a kind of masochism, self-masochism. He knows this isn't going to feel good. How can you go to the house where the one you love lives, with that person dead and the house black with no lights, and feel better? But he can't stay away. It's an incomprehensible and yet universal emotion, isn't it? In love, you look at the house where the one you used to love lives, right? In death, you go back to the one you loved who is now dead. We do it in life and in death. Nothing new about it. High school kids in particular like to hang around the house with their former boyfriends and girlfriends. He says that he feels like what in this stanza? You know what he says he feels like? Guilty like a thief, right? I'm guilty, as though he's committing a crime. That is, you feel guilt when you do what ought not to be done, and as though you were out to steal something, which isn't there. But he shouldn't feel guilty, should he? Except it's wrong. What he's doing is wrong. What is the word that makes the pain? Yeah. Well, okay, I think that establishes the emotion when it's over. We're not talking here about breastfeeding grief. He says, doors where my heart was used to beat so quickly. Responsive verb, isn't it? And it's not going to be there. Forgive me, like a guilty thing I creep. He is not here. 4 simple words. And then you picked up the word here. The noise of life begins. What's he talking about, by the way? All right. Milkman, right? Doing the things that start the day, but of course, Hallam's life is not beginning. And then you get these wonderful words. I think it's these words that T.S. Eliot loved. Ghastly through the drizzling rain on the bald street breaks the blank day. How the weather sometimes, this is a Seattle poem, I think, isn't it? What you catch, though, is where is the ghastliness there? Isn't ghastly a pretty powerful word for an emotion? I mean, something that's ghastly is appalling. And for me, that's one of the words that attaches. Nothing in this poem is appalling. Why is this appalling? Mostly, we would say, if you're up at 4 o'clock, sitting out on the porch, right, maybe with a cup of coffee and the PI and doing the New York Times crossword puzzle, those first sounds of morning would be very attractive. Why are they ghastly? Yeah. It's a good example of how we transform our environment through our emotions, is it not? If you feel ghastly, the street is not clean and clear and empty, it is bald. And why is the day blank? Where is the blankness?
In you.
Yeah, it's blankness in you. That's right. That's right. Sure. I hadn't thought of that, but you go there and he's gone. The difference, of course, is he knew Helen was gone, and they didn't know that Christ's body was not there when they went. But yes, I've always felt a strong biblical supporting context or mythology underneath Tennyson. That's a good place to stop. It's 5 to 2. But before we stop, should we do something amusing?
Yeah.
So you're not totally depressed? This will take another 5 minutes. I have only made 20 of these, so there should be 1 for 2 people, if you could look on, or 1 for 3. This is turn to the back of this. This is a Northern Farmer New Style. Okay, there should be going around. So could we make sure that we have at least 1 for 2 or 3 people, and you can look on. You won't be able to tell much by looking at it anyway, since it's in dialect. I was Xeroxing in Memoriam, and I thought, boy, if I don't do something to change the seriousness of this, you'll all be weeping by 2 o'clock and, and be gone by 2:15. So maybe I can get you to come back. Tennyson did 2 poems in the voice of the northern farmer. The old-fashioned farmer, old style, and then the new-fashioned farmer. And this is his sort of satiric comment on what's happened to the good old-fashioned landed farmer. It's in a dialect which I'm going to artificialize because I don't know exactly what it sounds, but I can do a reasonable facsimile of it. The farmer is riding along in his horse, behind his horse, with his son. And the son has made a big mistake. He's fallen in love with a poor girl. Right? And the context of this poem is that the rhythm of the horse is in the word property. Property, 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 okay? Doesn't thou hear me erse's legs as they canters away? Property, property, property. That's what hears them say. Property, property, property. Sam, there's an ass for the times. There's more sense in one of his legs nor in all the brines. Oh, there's a craw to pluck with, Sam. Yon parson's house, does it thou know that a man will be either a man or a mouse? Time to think on it then, for there'll be 20 to wake. Property, property. Oh, then, oh! Let me hear myself speak. What's a man got to be? A man or a mouse, right. Time to think about it. And his Sam is how old? Yeah. Me and the mother, Sammy, as a band a-talking of they. Those band not talking to mother, and she's band a-talking at me. They'll not marry for money? Those sway upon parsons' lass? No, they'll marry for love. And we both on us thinks thou an ass. See at her today go by. Saints' Day, they was ringing the bells. She's a beauty, thou thinks, and so is scores o' gals. Them has money and all. What's a beauty? The flowers blows. But property, property sticks, and property, property grows. Don't be a stunt. Take time. I knows what marks thou some mad. Weren't he crazed for the lasses me son when he were a lad? But he knowed a quacker feller as often as told me this. Don't thou marry for money, but go where money is. What's the new word? You don't have to marry for money, but go where it is. Come to East Side. Send your kids to East Side. And then they'll marry a rich kid. And he went where money were, and the mother come to hand with lots of money laid by and a nice bit of land. Maybe she weren't a beauty. He never give it a thought. But weren't she as good to cuddle and kiss as a lass as ain't nought? Yeah. Parson's lass ain't nought. And she went a nought when he's dead. The parson's lass doesn't have anything, and she's not going to have anything when he's dead. Okay? Mun be a governess lad, or summit, an addler bred. Why? For he's no but a curate, and won't never get his sin clear, and he made the bed as he ligs on afore he come to the share. Her father will never be any more than a curate. And he made his bed, and he's lying before he came to our shire. And then he come to the parish with lots of varsity debt. Stuck to his tail, they did. And got shut on him yet. And he ligs on his back of the grip with no one to lend him a shove. Worse nor a far-weltered yo for Sammy. He married for love. Love? What love? You can love the lass and her money too. Mocking them go together as they've good right to do. Couldn't he love the mother because of money laid by? Nay, for he loved her a vast sight more for it. Reason why. And Aye, and the mother says thou wants to marry the last comes of a gentleman born. And we both on a stinks on us. Whoa, then, property, well done. An ass, as near as made note. Oh, boy, then, well done, tanga. The bays is as fell as old. The flies are biting the horse, and it keeps moving. So, stop. Whoa. Break me a bit of the ash for his aid, lad, out of the fence. What does he want? A stick to stop the horse. He listens. Gentleman burn. Gentleman born? What's gentleman burn? Is it shillings and pence? Property, everything here in Sammy, I'm blessed if it isn't the same up yonder for them as it's the best. Tisn't them as money as breaks into houses and steals, them as coats to their backs and tax their regular mails. No, but it's them as never knows where a mail's to be at. Take my word for it, Sammy, the poor in a lump is bad. Them are their fathers, thus is, mun have been a lazy lot. For work mun have gone to the gittin' whenever money was got. Father, had almost nought, didn't have anything, right? Leastways, his money was id, but he tooed and he moiled, he sen dead, and he died a good un, he did. Look thou, there, where Wrigglesby Beck comes out by the hill. Further run up to the barn, and he runs up to the mill, and we'll run up to the brig, and that we'll live to say, and if thou marries a good un, I'll live the land today. Them's me notion, Sammy, whereby he means to stick. But if thou marries a bad un, I'll leave the land to dick. Come up, property. That's what I hears them say. Property. Canter away. But Tennyson did have a sense of humor. Okay, we'll take a few minutes for coffee and then come back. Yeah, just hang on to those now, and maybe I'll collect them at the end, and we can use them next week when we get back.
That's wonderful.
Go back to the serious issue at hand. We made our way through number 7, and now we're going to be skipping a few. I'll let you invite you to take these home with you if you want, and pick the poems that we're missing and maybe meditate over them. Tennyson is read best when you are feeling calm and collected. It's not good to have Hollywood squares on when you're reading Tennyson, because tic-tac-toe or any of those things, because the mood needs to be right. But in front of a fireplace on a quiet evening, he speaks very loudly. So we made our way through Dark House. Let's move down to number 9. Skip number 8. None of these deserve to be skipped, but obviously we can't do 150 poems. So what's happening now is he's bringing us into the memory of the movement, the historical movement. Death, Hallam died abroad, and Tennyson uses the transportation of the body back to England as a means or a subject of meditation. And so he speaks to the ship, which is doing this necessary but very grievous task. Fair ship, that from the Italian shore sailest the placid ocean plains, with my lost Arthur's love remains. Spread thy full wings, and waft him o'er. So draw him home to those that mourn in vain. A favorable speed ruffle thy mirrored mast, and lead through prosperous floods his holy urn. All night no ruder air perplex thy sliding keel, till phosphor bright, as our pure love through early light shall glimmer on the dewy decks. Sphere all your lights around, above. Sleep, gentle heavens, before the prow. Sleep, gentle winds, as he sleeps now, my friend, the brother of my love. My Arthur, whom I shall not see till all of my widowed race be run, dear as the mother to the son, more than my brothers are to me. Setting the scene. It's the plea to gentle earth, right? Lay lightly on the one I love, and hoping that the universe will somehow justify the grief and understand the loss. The universe almost never does, by the way, does it? But when we lose someone, we desire the winds to be gentler, the stars to be brighter, that some acknowledgement from outside be present for us. I hear the noise above thy keel. I hear the bell struck in the night. I see the cabin window bright. I see the sailor at the wheel. Thou bringest the sailor to his wife, and traveled men from foreign lands, and letters unto trembling hands, and thy dark afraid, a vanished life. So bring him. We have idle dreams. This look of quiet flatters thus our homebred fancies. Woe to us, the fools of habit, sweeter seems to rest beneath the clover sod that takes the sunshine and the rains, or where the kneeling hamlet drains the chalice of the grapes of God, than if with thee the roaring wells should gulp him fathom deep in brine, and hands so often clasped in mine should toss and tangle with shells. The whole phenomenon of the ship, what goes on in a ship, the bringing back of the body, some nice details, the whole being able to make the imaginative leap into the ship and to see, for example, a mail bag and the people waiting for that message from someone else alive on the other side of the ocean and trembling to receive the letters in eagerness. The sailor coming back to his wife who may have not seen him for 6 months, and then like a huge wave in the stomach, the knowledge that in the bottom of the ship is the coffin of the one you love. He would rather, what would he rather? He would rather himself be buried, wouldn't he, than that the ship should suffer and the body of the one he loves be sent to the bottom of the ocean. We have several kinds of calm. He's going through, you remember Emily Dickinson called it hours of lead, right, when you're in grief. The steely determination not to show grief. Or I'm thinking of Edna St. Vincent's Valet about what she would do in the subway. Remember? If she reads in the paper that you were dead, that someone who happened to be you across the street was killed, that I would look up and I would read the newspaper that much more carefully, because you don't make a spectacle of yourself in public if you're a lady. And Tennyson picks up that sense of calm, not raging grief. Calm is the morn without a sound, calm as to suit a calmer grief. And only through the faded leaf, the chestnut pattering to the ground. This is literal calm, isn't it? All you can hear perhaps. But Tennyson always amazes me how he picks these curious, common details. And you and I have heard it. The horse chestnut right now is falling on the calm mornings through the leaves, and I can just hear it going. Calm and deep peace on this high wold, and on these dews that drench the firs, and all the silvery gossamers that twinkle into green and gold. Calm and still light on yon great plain that sweeps with all its autumn bowers, at crowded farms and lessening towers to mingle with the bounding main. Calm and deep peace in this wide air, these leaves that redden to the fall, and in my heart, if calm at all, if any calm, a calm despair. Calm on the seas, and silver sleep, and waves that sway themselves in rest, and deep calm in that noble breast which heaves, but with the heaving deep. Is Hal's breast heaving? Yes, it is, but it's heaving with the ocean as the ship moves over the surface. And there's calm everywhere. And of course, the greatest calm is where? In him. But it's the calm of despair, and how to work one's way through it. Move down to number 13. Tears of the widower, when he sees a late lost form that sleep reveals, and moves his doubtful arms, and feels her place empty, is empty, fall like leaves. He's crying. I know I've referred to this, I've talked to you so many years, but this stanza reminds me of the moment to the lighthouse when Mr. Ramsay is walking down the stairs, remember? And Mrs. Ramsay's dead. And habit, he turns with his arms open to grab his wife, who he loves, and she's not there. And he's half asleep. And that sense of the automatic action, which you do out of habit because you lived with this woman for 40 years, well, certainly when you turn to give her a hug, she'd be there. Mrs. Ramsey is gone. And his image here of the widower whose wife has slept with him for years, and half asleep, he wakes up and imagines her lying there with him. And it's nothing but air. This is what it's like crying for the one you lost. Tears of the widower when he sees a late lost form that sleep reveals and moves his doubtful arms and feels her place is empty, all like these, which weep a loss forever new, a void where heart on heart reposed, and where warm hands have pressed and closed, silence, till I be silent too, which weep the comrade of my choice, an awful thought, a life removed, the human-hearted man I love, a spirit, not a breathing voice. Come, time, and teach me many years. I do not suffer in a dream, for now so strange do these things seem, mine eyes have leisure for their tears. My fancies, time to rise on wing and glance about the approaching sails, as though they brought the merchant's bales, and not the burden that they bring. What does he notice about his emotion? He's waiting for the ship, obviously. And what happens in that interval of time? The news comes that Helen's dead. You imagine the ship along the way. Now, what happens emotionally? It's an interesting phenomenon. Oh. He's weeping, and he's finding in his weeping, what does he have? Kind of a curious word. Leisure. What kind of leisure does he have? Yeah. You imagine when somebody dies in this kind of traumatic fashion that everything's going to be tense, that the feeling of grief is so strong that you think it's going to stay that way for a long time. But Tennyson discovers he can't keep it forever, right? The agony and the grief and the despair. And so he weeps, which is a release of grief, and discovers that even as he's weeping, he's got time to think. And so the healing process of the mind pulling away from the pain, we would call it psychologically, I imagine, starts to take place. And he's able to think a little bit and to give it a mental imagery. If one should bring me this report, that thou hadst touched the land today, and I went down unto the quay, and found thee lying in the port, and standing muffled round the woe, should see thy passengers in rank come stepping lightly down the plank, and beckoning unto those they know. And if along with these should come the man I hailed as half divine, should strike a sudden hand in mine, and ask 1,000 things of home, and I should tell him all my pain, and how my life had drooped of late, and he should sorrow on my state, and marvel what possessed my brain. And I perceived no touch of change, no hint of death in all his frame, but found him all in all the same. I should not feel it to be strange. What moment and emotion is that as you go through the process of grief? Yes, not only can you let's change the phraseology. He knows he's dead, right? And he believes he's dead, but what is strong, so strong that even the knowledge of it and the actual literal intellectual belief is there. If he'd walked in today, he wouldn't be surprised. And you said, boy, have I been feeling horrible about your death. And he said, oh, tell me about it. I wouldn't be shocked. I would be able to endure it. I remember this so vividly from my mother's death when I was 12. It took me months before I just didn't, I would come home from school at lunch and I just expected her to be there. I mean, I would say for 3 months, I half expected to smell bread being baked when I got home for lunch from grade school, because she used to bake bread. And one of the smells I loved most was opening that door in winter and, and the habit is so strong that maybe she's not really dead. Maybe it was a dream. Well, it is real, of course, for him. Number 15. Tonight the winds begin to rise and roar with yonder dropping day. The last red leaf is whirled away. The rooks are blown about the skies. How is the seasons appropriate? It's autumn. And you notice we're a little bit farther along now than we were earlier. Now the last leaves are moving along. The rooks are blown about the skies. The forest cracked, the waters curled, the cattle huddled on the lea, and wildly dashed on towering tree, the sunbeam strikes along the world. And but for fancies, which aver that all thy motions gently passed athwart a plain of molten glass, I scarce could brook the strain and stir that makes the barren branches loud. And but for fear it is not so, the wild unrest that lives in woe would dote and pour on yonder cloud that rises upward always higher, and onward drags the laboring breast, and topples round the dreary west, a looming bastion fringed with fire. What does he insist on believing? The weather's terrible, isn't it? But he's already prayed to God that the winds that bring the ship with Hal's body home be gentle and smooth. And so he's got a fancy or a willed belief that what is going on the ocean right now? It's as calm as glass. So it's an interesting, almost for me, a surrealistic image in this little poem. Something that Dali would do with a raging storm, and yet in the middle of it, that ship out of the ancient mariner, like a painted vessel, right, on a painted sea, in perfect calmness, moving without any wind at all. And that's his attempt to really contradict the raging emotion of the weather with his determination that there be a kind of control, I think, to this whole business. Isn't the storm even more appropriate emotionally? Of course it is. But he doesn't want to lose control. After all, Tennyson's a man, isn't he? And don't like to lose control. The body returns in poem 17. And here we sort of end the first section of the poem. Moving down to section 18, section 19. The Danube. He died by the Danube. And this is one of the nicest of the poems, I think. They bring him home. He meditates on the burying of Hallam in stanza 18 in England. In stanza 19, he pursues this thought. The Danube to the Severn gave the darkened heart that beat no more. They laid him by the pleasant shore, and in the hearing of the wave. There, twice a day, the Severn fills. The salt sea water passes by, and hushes half the babbling why, and makes a silence in the hills. The why is hushed, nor moved along, and hushed my deepest grief of all, when filled with tears that cannot fail, I brim with sorrow, drowning song. The tide flows down, the wave again is vocal in its wooded walls. My deeper anguish also falls, and I can speak of that. I like this one because I think those of us who've endured the loss of someone we love know what he's talking about here. People who are not thinking tend to think that grief comes strongly and then it moves quietly away. But I can tell you it's sort of in memory. The point here that Tennyson makes is a very powerful one, and that is that when you lose somebody, grief is like a tide, and he uses the image of the tide rushing up the Severn, the bore, going up, bringing the salt water up, and doing what to the river, essentially? Stopping it. He's right dead in its tracks, and everything is quiet. And then the tide loses its power, and the water rushes back out again. And what he says in the sonnet, what he says in the lyric is that this is the way I feel. My words pour, the need to speak comes to me, and I can write. And then the need subsides again, and I'm calm. And so grief is a coming and a going, and it may go on like this for ages. 20 years later, the right thought may well up grief, may it not, for someone you've loved, and you hadn't thought you would cry for that person for years. So I think it's a nice image and one to think about. Move down to number 21. I sing to him that rests below. It's how others react to the sorrow we're dealing with here. And since the grasses round me wave, where is Hallam now? Yeah. I take the grasses of the grave and make them pipes whereon to blow. What traditional imagery is he using here? As though he were what? A shepherd of sheep. Yeah, it's the old, it is traditional pastoral elegies, right? That you be a shepherd. And this is not by any means a pastoral. poem, but he picks up a couple of images. He says, since he's buried, I use the grasses and make a shepherd's pipe to sing my songs. The traveler hears me now and then, and sometimes harshly will he speak. This fellow would make weakness weak, and melt the waxen hearts of men. Another answers, let him be. He loves to make parade of pain, that with his piping he may gain the praise that comes to constancy. A third is wrath. Is this an hour for private sorrow's barren song, when more and more the people throng the chairs and thrones of civil power? A time to sicken and to swoon, when science reaches forth her arms to feel from world to world, and charms her secret from the latest moon? Behold, ye speak an idle thing. Ye never knew the sacred dust. I do, but sing because I must, and pipe but as the linnets sing. And one is glad, her note is gay, for now her little ones have ranged. And one is sad, her note is changed, because her brood is stolen away. What element in grief does he touch on with this poem? What do people say about him? They go by and he's in the cemetery and he's weeping, is he not? Or he's showing demonstrative grief of some kind. People have a variety of reactions. Reaction number one, okay. Leave him alone. He's making a parade of himself. Right? What's the matter? He's just showing off. That's one of the most irritating of all accusations when you are in grief, is it not? Why don't you control yourself like me? Okay. Second one says, that was the second one. The first one says, this person would make weakness weak. What does that mean, to make weakness weak? Isn't weakness already weak? Make it more so. In other words, he can take something which is already an absolute and make it worse. Because he's just making it worse and worse. The third one is really offensive. What does the third person say? That's right. In this, with Reagan as president, how dare you go in the cemetery and cry over somebody? Why don't you go and storm the White House? Boy, that isn't enough to drive a person crazy. I think we can remember this from about 15 years ago, and if you weren't a publicly demonstrative person on one side or another, weren't allowed the right to live at all. He comes back with a marvelous response. Why does he weep? I have to. I don't have any choice. I want him to say, do you think I'd be doing this if I were doing it for fun? Yes, he would. I do it, I sing as the linnet, a bird. And he gives two examples. Some birds sing for what reason? Because they're happy. And some birds sing because they're sad. And when you're sad, you sing. Sections 22 through 25 introduce the motif which is repeated, a path, a movement along a path. And these four poems, deal with the happy past, winding through the past. And he asks himself some interesting questions about the past. Was it as happy as I thought? I mean, am I making it greater than it was, or than it really was in actuality? We won't do all of these, but hit a couple of points. Say number 24. And was the day of my delight as pure and perfect as I say? The very source and fount of day is dashed with wandering isles of night. It all was good, and fair we met. The earth had been a paradise that never looked to human eyes since our first sun arose and set. And is it that the haze of grief makes former gladness loom so great? The lowness of the present state that sets the past in this relief. Or that the past will always win a glory from its being fair, and orb into the perfect star we saw not when we moved therein. One of the, I think, most attractive features of Tennyson is that he doesn't refuse to ask the honest questions of himself. And this is a very difficult question to ask when you're the person who is in grief. Anybody who knows, for example, what it's like to be the stepmother or the stepfather of and to replace a mother or a father who has died, knows how hard it is to fight the memory of somebody who's dead. Right? No matter what the paternal or maternal relationship was, the child will recast that parent in perfection, and you can't compete. It's like Truman trying to compete with Roosevelt. I mean, you just can't do it, and it takes ages to find the virtue in the one who makes the replacement. This is really a universal experience, and he's able to ask this of himself, is he not? The answer is going to be, yeah. It's not just that I feel lousy now, that I remember it as being good, but the actual relationship was wonderful. And I assume the honesty to ask the question means that the answer has for him a kind of honesty as well, and that he's not deluding himself. So I'm not totally certain about that, but it seems to me reasonable, given the nature of the poem. I know that this was life, the track whereon with equal feet we fared, and then, as now, the day prepared the daily burden for the back. He knew, what does he know? Things weren't perfect. In the morning you got up and you put on your backpack and you trudged your way through. But this it was that made me move as light as carrier birds in air. I loved the weight I had to bear because it needed help of love. Nor could I weary, heart or limb, when mighty love would cleave in twain the lading of a single pane, and part it, giving half to him. It's not that I didn't have my work to do, but that I had someone who loved me, who shared the labor that I did, and I'm aware of that. We're moving now to the end of this section, and it's really a very lovely conclusion. This is the road he travels. Now, that is, the traveling the road with the backpack on, with your friend. Now you must continue the journey, but without your friend. Still onward winds the dreary way, I with it. For I long to prove no lapse of moons can canker love, whatever fickle tongues may say. And if that eye which watches guilt and goodness, and hath power to see within the green a mouldered tree, and towers fallen as soon as built, oh, if indeed that eye foresee or see in him is no before, and more of life, true life no more, and love indifference to be. Then might I find ere yet the morn breaks hither over Indian seas, that shadow waiting with the keys to shroud me from my proper scorn. That's a little not too difficult. What does he imagine as he looks to the future? And he thinks of God, which of course by definition cannot be limited in terms of power. And he imagines what might be seen in the future. What does he say that he might imagine be the future? Or maybe desire the future. Yeah, and who'll be waiting perhaps. Yeah, in spite of that. And then the very famous, probably the most famous one of the whole series of poems. I envy not in any moods the captive void of noble rage. Is he talking about the captive? No. He's talking about what kind of captive? The one who accepts his prison. I don't envy the captive who doesn't want to get out, who doesn't have the rage, the desire to be free. The linnet born within the cage that never knew the summer woods. He does not envy the bird. Our parakeet doesn't know its pleasure to fly. And when we let her out of the cage, she heads back in so fast and she hangs right next to the door. Right? And if we take her out and push her, she'll fly around in a panic and go right back to the cage. Then when we open the door, she goes in and just says, thank heavens, I'm back in my cage. I assume she's happy there, but she's the bird he's talking about that he does not envy. I envy not the beast that takes his license in the field of time, unfettered by the sense of crime, to whom a conscience never wakes. He imagines here, interesting by the way, because the 19th century did not tend to imagine people who could be evil without knowing they were evil, did they? That's our century's idea. I don't envy the man who can be a criminal and live a life of crime and never even know what he's doing, never have a sense of guilt, of morality involved. Nor what may count itself as blessed, the heart that never plighted troth. but stagnates in the weeds of sloth, nor any want begotten rest. I don't envy what some people may count as a blessed state. I don't envy the person who never plighted troth, who never pledged his honor to somebody else. And of course, he's echoing the marriage ceremony, right? And thereto I plight thee my troth. I will accept you as part of my life. Instead of making the effort to connect with somebody, the person who stagnates and slow. He says, I don't envy that. One of the repeated themes in literature that as a high school teacher and a college teacher too, you hold up in front of students, especially in American Lit, which is my specialty, but in British literature also, is the recognition that artists and writers make that you don't get without spending. It's what Whitman calls spending for vast returns. You want to avoid pain, fine, you can do it. Also, you'll be avoiding love and happiness. The people who never grieve are people who never love. And that's the great dilemma, and you'll see it from, you name it, beginning on. Shakespeare talks about it repeatedly. If you want love, you have to take loss. And that's what he's saying here, and that is what's behind it. This, I hold it true. Whate'er befall, I feel it when I sorrow most. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. One of the difficulties of this poem, I'm sure you catch, is that those lines are so common we don't even hear them anymore. Right? It's one of those phrases that people just trip off their tongues. You hear it in high school, people write in their journals, well, Billy dumped me, well, 'tis better to have loved than lost. And they don't catch the meaning, which is part of the entire experience of In Memoriam, that you take the loss, not because you desire loss, but because you desire connection with people. Right? The love is not just love, it's connection. It's human interaction. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's right. That to rust in idleness. Yeah. Yeah. And the 19th century is a century where both temptations are very great, I think. It's easy in this century to settle down, but the possibilities are also greater than they've ever been. Time is changing. At one time, England would be essentially static for centuries, and now 25 years is a new life. And think what we've got in the last 100 years. You can be born in the horse and buggy age and die with people on the moon. And so risk is very available and visible to us. On the other hand, one of the modern themes is the recognition that the kind of risk we're talking about isn't available the way it used to be. We were debating last week in school, in class, what happened to heroes, and the students were raising the issue of astronauts. And one of the points that was made is that astronauts aren't heroes. It doesn't take a hero to sit in a capsule that somebody else made and is directing from Earth and get out and put your foot on the Earth. I mean, Armstrong didn't do anything. But that is, he didn't risk himself the way heroes generally risk themselves. He trusted technology. The hero would be the man who designed that capsule going up there. And knowing that he put it together. And the man who built it, right? The fellow in the factory saying, if I don't make this thing so it works, I die. That's the heroic mold. Armstrong just knew he trusted these people and he came back alive. So it's a real interesting issue, the whole business of risk and what makes heroism and what you accept for life. Not to denigrate them. I mean, obviously it took a lot of nerve to be the first people to go up there. But I think they trusted the scientists, don't you? And they didn't think they were putting... Yeah. Yeah. Okay, now we have a new section. Stanza 28. And what we're moving through in this section is a concern for individual immortality. Tennyson is raising that issue. What happens to the individual, to me? The great frightening concept for Edgar Allan Poe, that if I die, I may in fact be gone, and there will be no Poe. It's the first Christmas, so a few months have passed, probably. The time draws near, the birth of Christ. The moon is hid, the night is still. The Christmas bells from hill to hill answer each other in the mist. 4 voices of 4 hamlets round. from far and near, on mead and moor, swell out and fail, as if a door were shut between me and the sound. Each voice four changes on the wind, that now dilate and now decrease, peace and goodwill and peace and goodwill to all mankind. This year I slept and woke with pain. I almost wished no more to wake, and that my hold on life would break before I heard those bells again. But they my troubled spirit rule, for they control me when a boy. They bring me sorrow touched with joy, the merry, merry bells of Yule. The question is raised that most of us have felt at one time. How do we dare to celebrate a happy occasion in the year? With such compelling cause to grieve as daily vexes household peace, and chains regret to his decrease, how dare we keep our Christmas Eve, which brings no more a welcome guest, to enrich the threshold of the night with showery largesse of delight in dance and song and game and jest? See, but the answer is, for him in this first Christmas, there is no comfort at all. When I read this, I'm always reminded of Dickinson's poem about "'Twas just this time last year I died." Remember that lyric? She remembers the occasion of her death in the fall, and then she thinks about Thanksgiving, and she says, "Will Father make the plates, count the plates? Will there an even number? And will he inadvertently put on 12 plates or whatever instead of 11?" And that is the habits of occasions like Christmas are what hurt you the most, when you have this tradition that here is where he sits and here is where she sits, the way we do in our family, and people do what they've always done, and then they catch themselves and realize that Emily's not here anymore. Put that plate back. And then that painful stanza where she says, "And will it blur the Christmas glee? My stocking hang too high for any Santa Claus to reach the altitude of me." You know, they put the stockings in the fireplace, and somebody's going to be digging into that box. For us, it's a cardboard box in the basement with all those things, and there's one that's going to say Emily on it, and you don't hang it up anymore. And so it makes it all the harder, doesn't it, at that time? And he does not feel any great comfort, as you see in stanza 30. With trembling fingers did we weave the holly round the Christmas Christmas hearth. A rainy cloud possessed the earth, and sadly fell our Christmas Eve. At our old pastimes in the hall, we gambled, making vain pretense of gladness, with an awful sense of one mute shadow watching all. We paused. The winds were in the beach. We heard them sweep the winter land, and in a circle, hand in hand, sat silent, looking each at each. Then echo-like our voices rang. We sung, though every eye was dim. A merry song we sang with him last year. Impetuously we sang. We ceased. A gentler feeling crept upon us. Surely rest is meet. They rest, we said. Their sleep is sweet.